this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. Welcome to this week's episode. This week I speak with Jarrett, who is in New South Wales in Australia. Anna's had lots of experience in storytelling, and I had a great time chatting to her. It is a longer episode because she had so many great things to say, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Anna. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're coming from the south coast of New South Wales, where we've got Jarrett, who's going to tell us about her journey into storytelling.
Well, it's been a long one and a stop-start one. But it started 35 years ago when I went to America following a boyfriend and wanting to get into children's theatre, which is what I was doing here, street theatre and children's theatre. And when I got over there, I learned about storytelling, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I sort of had scanned the San Francisco Chronicle pages for art events, and there seemed to be a lot of storytelling happening. And I knew there was storytelling back in Australia because I'd been to one storytelling circle at Kirribilli Centre years ago, and it still comes up under a Google search. I don't know why, but anyway, that was my first experience of sitting in a circle and listening to stories and going, wow, I want to be able to do this. So I was in America and I thought, well, here it is. Maybe I should go to some of these events and see what it's about. And at I called a number of the presenters, I guess, as storytellers, and the only person that got back to me was Diane Falat, and she was very excited to call me and say, it's Black History Month, why don't you come with me to as many shows as you want? And I was like, what's Black History Month? And so she explained that every year in America they have a whole month where all the schools book all the African American presenters, and so I met her in Oakland. She picked me up and we went on a little road trip. It was pretty wild when we both laugh about this because she said, how will I know you? And I said, I've got long blonde hair and I'll be on the steps of the library. And I forgot to ask, how will I know you? I was thinking, well, she's black. I'll see her going by in a car. I didn't realise that in Oakland where she was meeting me, it was a very African American area, and so I had no idea who she was going to be. But anyway, she came by, she recognised me, she yelled out, Anna. And I was like, yeah, jumped in the car and went to see 3 shows in a day. And that was my first exposure of phenomenal storytelling. And I just watched Diane, basically no props, just sing and smile and do her thing and just like draw the whole audience in. And I remember the last show, these 2 boys in the front row were so excited. They started doing somersaults. And I just thought, that's what I want to be able to do. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I said that to Diane and she said, well, great, just hang out with me. You can come with me whenever I've got lots of shows. Come with me whenever I've got a show and you're not working. And that's what I did. And she hooked me up sort of a few months down the track with my first set of storytelling shows. She basically said, oh, what do you want to do with this? And I said, I don't know yet, but I'm Australian, so I guess I'll tell Australian stories. And Crocodile Dundee was really big. So people were excited about Australia. So I got together the Aussie Animal Show. It was called Amazing Australian Animals and told a set of stories. It ended up being a really great set. Shy the Platypus, Wombat Stew, Crunch the Croc, and some Aussie songs. And the San Francisco Libraries booked me. So I had my first shows and she came and gave me lots of feedback. And I just fell in love with the whole art form. Wow. So I was in San Francisco for a year, and in that year I ended up being invited to a storytelling festival in Albuquerque, which went for a week, and another one in Corn Island. It was called the Corn Island Festival in Louisville, Kentucky. So I got to be a teller at 2 festivals in my first year in America, in my first year of storytelling. It was really
International
quite
teller in your first year.
I know. But I was like, right, this is amazing. It's not only fun, but storytellers are cool. I don't need props and a stage, or a troupe. This is just what you can do, which is very portable. So I can travel America doing this. And when that year finished and it was time to come home, there's a long story, break up with one boyfriend, fall in love with Lenny, who I'm still married to, come back to Australia and work on finding my way back to America, basically, which is what I did. So I came back to Australia, did a bit of teaching English as a second language, bit of storytelling in the street theatre groups that I was involved with and the community arts side of things, and then went back to America and lived there for 6 years, basically carving out a way to be a travelling Australian storyteller and coming back to Colorado where I was based and being a cocktail waitress at the casinos when I wasn't on tour. So yeah, that was it was really quite extraordinary set of events. And
Yeah.
I guess the thing that really made it was Penny Amberg was the counsellor at the Australian consul in Washington, D.C. at the time. And she had a special job to promote Australian culture. America was there must have been some political thing going on. And so I in those days, I just used to rock up and introduce myself to people, it was before phones and everything. So I rocked up to the embassy and introduced myself to Penny, and we had a great chat, and she booked me some shows, came along to the show and just said, this is fantastic. I've never seen live storytelling before. And she booked me for a really big gig at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is sort of like the premier arts facility for the Arts Australia Festival. That was sort of, I think that was my first year back. So I was legal now because we were married, and it just kind of, that was like the entree into having some recognition and being able to travel around America to festivals and schools and be mentored by Diane the whole time. I had lived with her for 6 weeks as well before I had left the first year when I was in America. And in that 6 weeks, she just told stories to me every night and helped me work on everything, voice, song, rhythm,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I went to Scotland that year as well and met Duncan Williamson. So I learned a little bit more about myself. I've got Scottish-German ancestry, a little bit more about the Scottish style of storytelling and the travellers and the magical world of fairies and, stories from people who work the land and know the land. So that was a really different style of telling. And when I came back to Australia, Moses Aaron, who was a very well-known Jewish Australian storyteller, he mentored me to do a tour of the Outback for a month with, what was it called? The Travelling Teenage Roadshow, funded by the Australia Council. And so I found myself in remote communities in northwest New South Wales, working with Aboriginal and European kind of mixtures with the stories that I'd sort of put together, a little bit of Scotland, a little bit of America, a little bit of me. And just exploring what is this thing called story that people love. And so I guess by the end of the 6 years in America, I had an incredible run, but I got really, really homesick. And I felt like I was losing contact with Australia, that I was crafting a show that worked amazingly well for American audiences, but was actually getting further and further away from what was happening in Australia and what my sisters and friends were telling me about. And I just thought, no, I want to go home. And when I come back to America, I'm going to have a different sort of show that is much more connected. I know how to do the big stage stuff now. I know how to talk the talk. I know how to be, or, do lots of interviews and be glamorous, but I wanted to come home and just be grounded in my culture and go from there. So that's how I got started.
Amazing. That's like one of the most epic journeys I've heard. Like I ask people, like that's the first question I always ask them. That's like
I can't make it any shorter.
I know, but like it's just, it was, you were in the right place and the right people and you knocked on the right doors and everything just sort
Yeah,
of opened for you, which is really incredible. I really love that.
yeah.
So how do you think, I mean, your children's theatre background, how do you think that helped you in your jump into storytelling?
Oh, it was pretty foundational because I had a pretty deep understanding of. I'm in part of drama training. That was my major, drama and philosophy. So I had the deep thinking and the physical theatre training, and that was pretty the best combination. I didn't know it at the time, and then I also worked as a radio announcer, doing arts reviews and political exploration. So those three combinations of experiences and skills then gave me what I needed to make America work. I was really good with media because I knew how it worked. I'd been on the other side. I was really good on stage because I had spent 3.5 years studying being on stage and what it means to be a performer, actor, and do all the inner work, and then adopt all these different styles of acting techniques. But the one that I loved most was Stanislavski, which is about being real, and being natural and understanding how to work any space in its natural way. So, and black box theatre. So I had that training, and then I guess the voice and working with the voice, both for radio and theatre, was essential. I hadn't done singing when I was at uni. I didn't see myself as a singer at all, except for, going out to pubs and screaming with bands. So the singing part came from working with Diane and then remembering. I am also musically trained. I trained in flute and piano right to sixth grade level, so I have that foundation. And then once I started singing, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I want to do more of this. So I'd done the speaking voice, but I needed to learn the singing voice. And so I did a lot more workshops whenever I could, and just going along and singing people. And it kind of, just wove it all in together. But it meant that I had both the foundational skills to give me the confidence to stand on stage and be me, as well as, I guess what I discovered was I didn't think I had a very good memory, but I have a really good oral memory. I remember nearly every conversation I have with people. I don't remember names, but it's like, what is that part of the brain that just goes, got it, got it. And so once I realized that, it's if I heard any story that I liked, I could tell it back straight away. And that told me, and that's, Diane and Duncan both recognize that. And so they're like, Duncan said, if you like that story, tell it back to me. Yep, you've got it. Go out and tell it. Diane was, how about this one? How about this one? And she told me lots of stories, but they weren't my stories. But they helped me understand what stories spoke to me and then why. And that's just been probably the hardest journey of all, because I originally was booked to tell stories that entertain audiences that I loved, but really my focus was on entertainment. And so once you start doing sort of the deeper heart and soul work of what am I doing, what's my journey, why am I doing it, and really tapping into the energy of your presence. So as an actor, there's still one, even when you remove the fourth wall, which is what I liked, the Brechtian style, you're still an actor. Whereas storytelling, you have to take that away and be you. And that's probably why I've had a stop and start journey in terms of my 35 years of storytelling, because I just find that really hard sometimes to stand in front of people when I don't want to. If I just don't feel up to that public side of being raw, and so that's been really interesting to learn about, to develop a whole nother set of skills, which is sort of along the lines of theatre training that goes deeper. That's where I sort of started. The New Theatre in Newtown did some really edgy stuff. And I did a workshop there and I just loved it because it was exploring this space of the unknown and all the feelings that are kind of taboo and all the things that you'd kind of initially just go, oh, well, I can't do that or wouldn't do that. And it was just about releasing sounds and movement from your body that you'd never thought were possible. And that was an extraordinary experience because it freed me up to be a lot more experimental in my own development while I followed sort of my interest in oral storytelling and traditional tales and writing, which are all quite different. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey with lots of parts. One day there will be a book, but I have to sit down and actually put it together. Anyway, there's a whole body of work now that's coming out, which I'm really excited about, that helps me understand what all that weaving was, and where I'm at now with deep story processes and thinking deeply, and that work that I've been doing with the Fairy Tale Society, traveling between worlds and realms, and not seeing anything as separate. I'm just being able to be in that imaginary space. I don't see it as imaginary anymore, because for me it's actually alive all the time, calling you. And that's the hardest part. It's like, man, the deeper you go and the more intimate you get with these stories and beings and places from these magical worlds or imagined worlds, then the harder it can be sometimes to just, get on with the logistics of life.
I do. I've got a quote here that you actually said at one of the fairy tale conferences. I'll read it back to you. It says the story is a living being. Believe in the story. Let the story tell itself. And that really resonated with me, when you said it the first time. And I feel like what you're talking about that is that the living being is working on the self, and then it becomes this can't even find the right words for it. A collaboration between the self and the story to create
that's exactly
something.
right. Yeah. So I loved the idea of the story dancing between the storyteller and the story listeners, and so I kind of have always worked with that, and you can see it. You can see when those words become something inside other people's hearts, and then there's this like invisible thread of connection between you and them and the story is doing its thing between you. And that kind of has got me through for a long time. In the last few years, as fires, and then with the whole COVID journey, going sort of even deeper, what I've found is like, there is that, but there's also, if you understand stories as beings, as energy, then they're very dynamic, and they can move, and you can move in and around them, and it's a two-way thing. So it's kind of it's a very abstract relationship, but it's got me really fascinated, because I looked at my signature stories. I wasn't going to tell stories anymore for a while. I just went, no, this just takes so much work to get good stories up to a performance level, and then get bookings and be out there. But then I reviewed what I had. This is thanks to COVID. After the fires, I just wanted to just burn everything. And then when COVID came, I was looking at these shelves and stuff. I went, you know what? I'm going to look through this stuff and just see what's there. And I was like, wow, I've got like 20 signature stories that have been with me for a long time and just keep growing. Layers and layers within those stories, and relationships with people and places when I tell that story. And that has really taken me to the next level of excitement, and the idea of, we probably are, as storytellers, custodians of parts of culture and types of stories, depending on what your style is. I'm still very strongly attracted to the traditional tales, because they've lasted a long time and they morph as we change, so they reflect so many things. And I think the Bohemian fairy tales that I've been working with for 11 years with Lenka is the thread that's kept me really interested, because Lenka is a puppeteer, so she understands magic. She loves story, but she's not a storyteller. And so she loves to tell the stories that she knows from the Czech culture, which they consider themselves the international capital of fairy tales. So she tells me the stories, and then, wants me to tell them anywhere, to keep part of keeping the culture. So last night we had a couple of hours. We're planning hopefully a residency in 2026 together in Bohemia. But last night we just talked about fairy tales and specific places and the magic that's in the forest and the caves and the rivers of the Bohemia area through time, and the really ancient stories that have been layered over time with all sorts of politics and religion. But their foundations are quite rooted in ancient stories and places that are still around. And so Lenka was telling me the name of those places, and she had all these books. It's all in Czech. None of it's been translated. But it was so exciting. So I asked her a series of questions. I said, I really want all my stories to be place-based. And when I tell that story, to be honouring the real traditional source of where those stories come from, but also understanding the importance of those stories and story beings, And she gave me a book called The Elementals, which is all about literally that. Some of these amazing fairies and gnomes and creatures of the night and the river that are all custodians of places that are special. They might be guarding gold. They might be protecting a freshwater spring, which is what Lenka was saying. There's a lot of those. And I just think, well, here you go. I'm a passionate conservationist and educator, and I love stories, and science and art haven't been meeting for me easily up until now. But I can see where that interdisciplinary way of thinking and understanding can really kind of delve deep into the traditional stories and articulate why they're relevant today as more than ever. And this last conference in Melbourne was amazing because I loved that question. It was the idea of past, present, and future, and taking those really odd stories, honouring the source, but then also playing with the things that are contemporary questions, because stories are dynamic and they have always been, and I like that. I wasn't trained that way. I was trained to kind of define and contain and frame and explain. And so I've done a lot of workshops that have done that for all sorts of different groups of people, from Australian adventure bush therapy to early childhood teachers to people on wellbeing yoga retreats. But now I can see that a lot of that work that was all quite separate and using lots of different languages is coming together as one, and that deeper understanding of some of my favourite signature stories will mean that those stories will still resonate in all those different contexts in Australia or anywhere else I travel, depending on the audience. And that's kind of exciting.
That's really exciting. So the signature stories that you mentioned, are they stories that they're traditional stories, or they're stories that you've adapted, or they're originals, or a bit of both?
It's a combination of all of those. So my blurb used to say, Anna Jack tells a combination of traditional and original stories, and that's still what I do. I wasn't that confident telling my own stories at first. I like to write them, but I didn't tell them. And then as I was telling ghost stories to kids, it's like, wow, these really work, especially because I believe in ghosts and I love a good ghost story. So my original stories tend to either be ghost stories, encounter with wildlife stories, which are also really special stories that people seem to love, like meeting the bison in Yellowstone in the middle of winter and having the buffalo breath, the sound of the buffalo breath in the mist, knowing that there was something there but not knowing what, So those encounter stories. And the third one is personal stories, which Diane has encouraged me to tell more of. And I've found them quite hard as a sort of whole story, but I'm now finding that by telling personal stories in and around the traditional stories, so it's like my story and my relationship with the stories that speak to me and continue to speak to me, that's what works. So that's been really fun for me. And then in terms of traditional stories, it's like, well, why do I've got bookshelves of stories from cultures all over the world. Some of them don't mean anything to me at all, or you read a book and you just find one. Why do certain stories and cultures speak to you? And so that's another thing that I guess I've been exploring. But for me, it's probably a thematic idea where, like, I have stints where I'm interested in certain things. For a while, I was doing star stories. And one of my favourite stories and signature story is still a star story that was told to me back in 1991 when I was teaching English in Sydney. I came back from America and got a job teaching the Chinese that were coming out from the Tiananmen Square riots, and was working with people who spoke no English at all and were quite traumatized. And I used my drama skills to teach, which was exciting. But then I also worked with two Chinese women, E and Nancy, and we went out to Yamcha one morning. And I was talking to them about the trauma that the students, the stories they were trying to tell me. And I said, how do you guys smile and just do what you do every day? And he said, I just think of my father. And I said, oh, what do you think of? And he said, well, he was one of the people who was chased out for his intellectual activity and skills. He was a professor. And we had to hide in the forest many times as a family. And when he had all these hiding places, and when we went there, he would open different areas and shut us in the darkness. But he would always tell me a story before he did that to make me feel okay. And I said, wow, that's pretty powerful. Can you tell me one of those stories? And she told me The Woman Weaver of the Skies, which is just the most beautiful story, and has led me on quite a journey of understanding of the importance of this one day of the year, the seventh day of the seventh month, when the heavens and the earth remember an event that happened a long time ago that's based in love, and that feeling of being separate and that being able to come together once a year through magical threads.
Oh, so, lovely.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful traditional story. And I think the stories that have stayed with me are ones where I it's like I'm right there remembering sitting having yum cha with E and remembering the feeling that I had when she told that story and how delighted she was when I asked if I could share that story. I didn't know that it would grow into one of my favorite stories. So it's those relationships with people, and I guess learning about cultures that goes into the types of stories that I'm attracted to. There are other ones that I've just read in a book, like the Beatushka, the Bohemian fairy tale. I didn't know anything about Bohemian fairy tales, but I love this story, and I told it at a gypsy gathering, which I used to go to up at Safala, this little quirky town out near Bathurst, and it's like stuck in the gold rush days, and we had a big gathering there with a great big fire on the oval with all the stars out because it's a long way from lights, and all the big old trees that haven't been forested, and we're sitting around the fire. There's about 30 Romani people from all parts of Australia that come to this, and I'm part of that community and am invited in as a storyteller, I guess. So sitting around, lots of music, and I just told this story. I thought, well, this is a great place to tell a new story. I'll just try it and see how it goes. And Lenka was sitting beside me, and she videoed it, which I thought, oh, it's a bit strange. Why she videoed me? But I'm glad she did, because at the end of the story, she said to me, oh, that was a good story. Where did you find that? And I said, I found it in a book. I just off my sister's bookshelf, and I really liked it. So I thought I'd tell it tonight. She said, did you know that's a Czech story? And I said, no, I have to admit, I haven't done any research. I just thought it was a cool story about a wild woman, and I like those kind of stories. And she said, well, I'm Czech, and that's one of our most important stories.
Wow.
I know. I looked at her and went, oh my God, I am so embarrassed to be culturally ignorant. And I said, well, did I at least tell it properly? And she said, yeah, there's a few things that were missing. And I said, great, can we get together? And I would love to learn more about, because I like that story. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And she calls it the fairy tale day, but we basically organised to meet in Sydney. So no gypsy gathering and fires and stars. It was in a bloody cafe just over the Harbour Bridge in this intense sort of urban area, which normally would spin me out. But we got together in a cafe, and she brought a carload of books to go twice from the car into the cafe, set up in the corner, and all the books were in the Czech language. And she led me through the history of that story from the oldest. She had a book that was 150 years old with a version of that story, and then she showed me how it's been edited and changed and become sort of more layers of patriarchy over the original story. And she showed me these beautiful drawings that were exactly what I saw in my head when I told the story. And I just kept saying to her, wow, what's going on here? This is amazing. And that connection, we were even talking about it last night. It's like, what, I won't know until I finally get to Bohemia physically what that connection is. But isn't that extraordinary that a storyteller's imagination and memory, that ancestral memory or lineage or whatever it is, can see perfectly something in a story before even actually understanding the story and the relevance.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the spiritual connection with the story and how the stories are their own entities, that they come and they're sharing themselves with us, and that's quite a gift.
And they speak to you. They say, like, I think I didn't. It took me quite a while to learn to do this because I was so focused in America on being a performer and, you know, getting booked and having a show and doing that. But in Australia, especially down here on the South Coast, it's sort of pretty sleepy and not much cultural activity in terms of ongoing events. So when I told stories, it was kind of usually to people who'd never heard a story before and a little bit new. So I had to kind of work out what fitted. So whether I was on a boat on the river telling stories under the stars or on a kids' camp, just telling stories at night, or at a women's retreat and a moon lodge. There were all these kind of organic, great events that I became involved in where my stories just were my gift and my presence. And I learnt in those places that, wow, these stories have a life of their own. It's like, people down here didn't want the hooper, hey there, I'm Anna Jarrett, the Australian storyteller. I had to be very, very grounded and not, that tall poppy stuff, but it was good because what ended up happening was I understood that the story was like an invited guest. And so I would just take all my stories that I thought might work for the occasion, but then I would say, when I got there, write our stories, let me know who wants to be told. And I'd just listen and I wouldn't know, which drove me mad, but I wouldn't know until it came to the moment where storytelling was meant to happen, either organically or as part of a program, what I was going to tell. But sure enough, one story would just go, boom, me. And it was usually the story, not the character in the story, which I found really interesting because I'd been trained in drama. I was used to working with characters and relating to characters. But when those stories started to speak to me like that, and they never seemed to argue, they always seemed to be the perfect story for that time. And then they came out really differently because I was telling in so many different contexts. So I could listen to the story while I was telling and think, wow, this story has a life of its own. And I don't know where I read about stories as being maybe when Clarissa Pinkola Estes did The Women Who Run with Wolves, and she took a very Jungian interpretation to her stories, but she did deeply understand how stories live. And I think I probably learned that then. And that spiritual stuff about the idea of a story being a being is, the journey that's unfolded. That's been really beautiful, but very hard for me to articulate. Like down here, we have a Congo music jam and everybody loves to get up and have three sets that they, a set that they can play and do a bit of collaboration. And when I'm sort of feeling up to it, I'll jump on and tell a story. And it's always fun because I never know what story it's going to be. And you're already hanging out with a bunch of musicians, and musicians usually love stories, but often there'll be a little bit of music that happens in and around the story. And it's so vibrant. It's like the best way to actually celebrate a single story, and to just know that when I finish telling it, it's living in that space and in the hearts of all the people that were there. And that makes me really happy. That's probably what's kept me going, continuing this story, because I'm both fascinated by it, but also like, wow, what a beautiful thing to be able to do, but also to be the one, with that skill, I guess, skill, calling,
In the
whatever
back.
it is.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
That is really beautiful. This podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling. We've sort of touched on this a little bit already, but what do you think is at the heart of storytelling and why we need the oral tradition today?
The heart of storytelling. Well, I think it's just basically what makes us human. So, if you've got a voice, you can sing, you can talk, and then story now has become so many more things because it's taken many forms. It's not just the oral tradition, but basically it's an expression of being, and it's relevant to every culture and every person and every age and every context, and that's why it has so many different forms and keeps reinventing itself. And that's another. I've been mostly talking about the oral tradition, but most recently I've become really interested in how story is kind of leaping into all these different forms and what it means, which is also what the Fairy Tale Society is doing, looking at fairy tales across all art forms. And I think that's a really vibrant way to work with story and understand story. So, but why this heart business is interesting. It's heart and soul. Lindy Mitchell used to call her business, I think, Heart and Soul Stories or something like that, because we had conversations about it, which was just when you tell a story, there's this extraordinary opportunity to connect heart to heart. And it's just the nature of oral story, where you are opening your heart before you even tell the story. And then you are sharing from your heart and you are giving. It's like a gift, and it travels to another heart and it sits in the heart. So it's beyond the words, which come from the mind. There's a whole bunch of energetic exchange and emotional exchange that comes from the heart that is what forms these incredible bonds. Like, it's like, wow, if you can tell a story, you can make friends anywhere you go, because something happens. People feel really close to you when you tell a story, and it resonates for them in that deep heart place. And I guess what I've realized in this culture that we don't always have that opportunity to connect deeply heart to heart. And I mean, I see it even at school, and you're trying to make connections with learning, but the best connections with learning come when you use story as a stimulus, because suddenly, boom, they're listening, they like you, and wow, whatever you say on top of that must be really cool, because the story has spoken to their heart, not their head. And it's a very direct, powerful form of communication that just has its own way of working. I love that, and that's also what I'm really committed to. And I think we as oral storytellers understand that really deeply, and need to keep kind of working to keep that heart in story. The other day I got one of those LinkedIn messages, and it was from a guy who calls himself a story seller, and I was like, no, don't do that to the word. I kind of have strong beliefs about the heart and soul of story, but that's because of where I've come from and the story I've been sharing with you. Yeah.
So I'm
and
just
where it
wondering,
was,
just with story, as stories changing into different forms, can we still maintain that heart connection, I wonder?
Well, that's my big question, because I was looking at, so this is conservation education. So a lot of the work I've done with the Endangered Shorebirds program for the last 11 years has been talking to people about the birds and helping them to form a connection with these birds that they often can't see, have no clue what they look like, and might still think a bird's a bird. What's the big deal? And so it took me quite a while to learn more about the birds and experiencing them directly than myself. But once I started weaving the stories about living on the South Coast and having meetings with the birds and all the other events that go on in the natural world, I was able to bring people into that story that are coming from anywhere, from Sydney, from overseas. And I looked at that and realised, this isn't about information. It's about helping people just to listen to the story and come in where they're ready and what they're interested in, and then to sort of steer the story as you see the different points of connection happening. And that level of storytelling in both that conservation education and then also in the caves when I worked as a discovery guide in Wombeyan Caves for 10 weeks. I knew nothing about caves when I started, but I fell in love with them. And I was scared. I was just so scared of getting information wrong because it was meant to be a pure science talk. And I'm trained in interpretation. I did a university course in it. And so I understand a lot of the principles of interpretation. And storytelling is one of them, but it's not all of them. But I found as I got confident with the material and the relationship with the caves, so spending time with the crystals myself and having a conversation in the caves with the cave, which I didn't tell my boss I was doing that, but that's how I was working until I felt like the caves were part of me and I was part of the caves, and the stories and the information shifted, and it was like, wow. So we went on a journey in the caves for 90 minutes and everybody was building their own knowledge and relationship. But they also were like in this journey of wonder for 90 minutes that I consciously crafted for different groups. And I became really interested then in the idea of small stories being interconnected as part of a bigger story, and where layers of stories sit in place and speak at different times depending on who's listening to the story and what's relevant and what permissions you have, what your own level of knowledge is, So that was a real gift working in the caves because it showed me how exciting it is to just take people on a journey of wonder every day and see them completely light up and want more, but also to build this story, layers of stories of the caves themselves, which in some ways was a bit abstract for me because they're there, but it's like, God, how do you turn this science of deep time into interesting stories? But it did. It happened over time, and I just had to allow the story to organically evolve. And I did a lot of research every night, and so it was like being in a residency space because I was staying on site, and there was no internet. I just had my books and my stories and my own company, which is the best. It was the best intensive that you could ever do, So that's the kind of space I'm longing for again, where you see the heart of story and the heart and soul of place sink its teeth into the actual story and stories that you're telling, but also energetically come alive so that when the story in the form of words is given out, it can reach into the hearts and minds whoever's receiving it and just instantly grow into something that you have no idea what it is, but you can see it and you can hear it in the questions and the conversations and the stories that other people tell you. And that's the bit where I started getting really interested in the heart of the story. You can do a tour and people can go through the caves and learn about the crystal formations, but not tell their own story. Or you can do a tour where you say things and it just moves people, if it's a smaller group, to feel like they just really want to share a story. And when you look at the layers of stories of people traveling and encountering and discovering that people want to tell and share in that special space, it makes me really understand how special storytelling as an oral tradition and the heart is, even as we feel like so much is being taken away with AI and technology and fast pace of life. Yeah, I've got kind of those two things going on.
Well, it is a tricky balance, isn't it? Because this is where the world is sort of heading, but then the heart connection is very grounding and real. It's tangible. You can feel it. Yeah, so it's a really hard thing to balance, and we can probably do both, I imagine.
I think we've got to learn to do both, and that's where I've just started primary teaching this year. And it's been good for me because they've got two big screens now in the classroom. So half the classroom wall space is taken up with bloody technology. And that's what you teach from. But then there's all these other spaces that also have amazing material on them. And I've been learning to just go, okay, that's how it's done now. That's important. I'm going to try and make that my friend. And then when I'm not doing that, there's time to also do a bit of music or a bit of story as a transition, and I don't always get to do it, but I've actually it's been good for me to be in that space, because instead of wrestling with technology, I'm actually sitting with it going, this is the way it is. And if you want oral stories to be vibrant and alive, then we've got to get with that program. You've got to be able to stand on stage and have those huge screens, 3 big screens behind you with your face. You're there on stage still, but, that's just the way performance is done now too. Yeah, so I think we've got a lot to address as storytellers in terms of how we're going to do the next chapter of performance. But I think interdisciplinary collaboration, flexibility, adaptation, doing grassroots stuff yourself, and then being able to do the big high-tech stuff as well is probably, and keeping your own heart intact.
Well, I mean, like to go back what you said about being yourself, you've taken the walls away, you're completely yourself. That requires a lot of inner work. You can't just stand up and do that without doing the work. It's just
and it's ongoing inner work. Yeah.
It's really vulnerable.
I think the closest to it is probably comedians in terms of that nervous. And so, and they just keep on keeping on. They lay it all out there on stage.
They really do. They really do.
Yeah. But I do enjoy. I've had the chance to sort of meet with some and just also see them down here. And the good ones I find are working with that same raw energy. There's something there that is just like, okay, if I share this, I know it's just going to connect with 350 people or whatever, the house is full of. That, and looking for that, the points of resonance, the universality, what is it in the story? What's the emotion? What's the main
heart
idea?
resonance. Yeah.
And it does take, it takes it's ongoing work, just kind of like looking and listening and learning. I'll be honest, I wouldn't have a clue. I just find focusing on my signature stories and enjoying what stories have to offer and seeing where they want to go has been, the way to look at the role of storytelling now and into the future. My friend Diane, who was my initial first storytelling encounter, became my best friend and is still one of my best friends. And we talk story, once a month or so. And she just tells me story after story. She's still doing the international festival circuit around all over America and the world. And so whatever she does with her heart, and it's just really from the heart, resonates in all these different cultures. And I've watched that, and she told me, I said to her, because I get anxious about performance stuff now, and I was like, I can't do big stages. I love the stage, but I can't do it anymore. It's just that anxiety stuff drives me mad. And she said, I get nervous before I go on stage too. Do you know what it feels like to stand in front of a whole white audience when you're the only black person in the room? It's not comfortable, but I do it. And so conversations like that have also helped me to think about the work of the storyteller and just continuing to commit to the
commit to the craft.
To the hard work. The craft.
That surprises me that you get a bit of anxiety around performance, because I have that. I have this sense of dread, even though I'm really prepared before it. Get there, do it, feels incredible. I feel so alive. It feels amazing. I'm in the zone. And then afterwards I beat myself up. Like I've got this terrible routine. I need to work on it. So I guess so I'm surprised that you have some anxiety, because you've had so much experience. So I don't feel quite so alone in that. So have you got
I think the lesson is or as long as you're doing something new, it'll always be there, because it's the unknown. And the older you get, the more you want to sort of feel like you want to know, you want to feel like you know stuff. But it's like, no, every single time you perform in public, it's the unknown. Even something like the Fairy Tale Society. I mean, the third time round in Melbourne, I was more confident because I could hear my material making sense. But that one in Brisbane 2 years ago, I had no idea whether what I was going to say was going to make sense. And I was incredibly nervous. I went through this huge walk along the river beforehand, just going, okay, story gods, it's time, mate. do your thing, because I have no idea. And by the time I came back to the room, I felt I had that sort of support, spiritual support, and energetically I was grounded and ready to offer. And then as I spoke, it's like, oh, it seemed to come out quite well, and then it got received incredibly well. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to be honest now, because I've not talked about that side of things. I've always wanted to be, you know, seen as that sort of confident professional. It's like, no, that's a facade. This is the reality behind the scenes, you know. And yeah, so I think that's
I'm
important.
interested that you just said that you called on the story gods. Like, is that something that you do? Because I sometimes do that. I say, you know, I ask the story to be what it's going to be. Is that something that you do
Yeah,
before?
yeah. For formal, any kind of formal presentation, I ask for all ancestors and gods and guides to be present, come to the party.
Amazing.
A beautiful storyteller named Brother Blue from America, he was from Harvard, and he used to walk around in a coat with butterflies all over it, and it was rainbow colors on the inside. And he walked around the campus, and he used to just tell stories. He was known as, you know, sort of the crazy wise man. And he was absolutely gorgeous. Like, he was like, wow, who is this guy? And he said to me, I was having a chat one time at the National Storytelling Festival, which is just these huge tents with thousands of people come to hear a single storyteller on stage. And I did the regional showcase and had the experience of it, and it was good. But I was just like, I just don't think I could be a featured teller and just go from stage to stage talking to thousands of people each time. But I said something to him, and he just laughed, and he said, oh, it doesn't really make any difference for me. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, if I'm telling a story in an amphitheater and only one person turns up, all the empty seats are full of angels.
No, lovely.
Look, you know, I went, yeah, just gorgeous. That is the best gift in the world. Not like, why does only one person want to come to hear my show? And then if there's 1,000 people, then all the angels are there above them, you know. And that was kind of, I mean, it's quite a esoteric way of thinking about it, but I'm esoteric, so I kind of have taken that with me wherever I go. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love it. So do you have any other advice for emerging tellers, well, people who are starting out a bit like me? So
I think the main thing is to just really understand that as an art form, it is about being you. So, you know, that idea of authentic voice and presence, natural presence, is really important. To understand that when you're working with story, you're working with a combination of energies that ground you and also allow you to sort of fly, and that you need a balance of both of those to be telling a really good story. So wherever you are, you're totally present in that space with those people and with that story. The story is the part where you need to fly. The being present with the audience and the space is the part where you need to stay completely grounded. And if you shift out of that space, they will feel it straight away. It'll be like some of those energetic threads that are connecting you are cut. So I guess that's something that I began to understand really well. I don't know when, but once I started to understand that, like in my early days, it was really just about being a fabulous performer, and I loved it. So it's just all about passion and finesse and exoticness, all that stuff. But it more recently, probably, it's become just the knowing, the breath work that's involved. So I would highly recommend storytellers do yoga or a combination of voice and breath training, even before performance stuff. The performance stuff will come if you feel completely grounded in your body and comfortable in yourself. And that will show in both the way you tell the story as well as your relationship with the story. And I think, you know, you listen to a lot of storytellers and they just sound like, to me, they're trying to hype up the story, but they're not giving anything of themselves in that story. I'm not feeling who they are. I'm not hearing why that story is important to them. And for me as a story listener, but also as a storyteller that's been doing it for a long time, I want to hear that. I want to know that and feel it. And when you're with the masters, which I have had the privilege of being with these, you know, exceptional storytellers, you can feel it. Just like, oh, they just know. They know who they are. They know what they're doing. They know why they're here. and they know why they're telling that story. So really, really strong clarity of your choices of material. And then, of course, impeccable sense of timing. So that can be the hardest thing of all, because you get kind of precious about your material. For me, I do timing organically, and the story seems to know in its own rhythm and flow how to go to a certain time. Like it's usually under 15 minutes, but it's taken a long time to get there. I told a lot of stories over time before I got to that, because I was still working out parts of the story as I was telling them. So know your story and the parts of it really well, but then also know it as a whole. And I love the metaphor of weaving a tapestry, and every word is a thread. So each word and each sentence and each image. So I say what I see, but different people have different processes. But so I weave images now, and the words come out of that image. It's like I take a chunk of wool and I go to weave it, and the words sort of flow along with it.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to find your own, what's your style of learning and what's your style of working, what's your voice, and how do you actually, what's your consciousness of your own process working with words and story, and what's your relationship is a word that's come up recently. And I just love this. It's like signature stories, but also what's your relationship with that story? Why are you telling this? And if you don't have to be rational about it, but you can kind of like, why do you have a group of friends? Why do you just enjoy hanging out with certain people? Because you do. So take that same approach to story. I see my signature stories as like they are like a group of friends. They're kind of part of my life. So really work on that holistic integration of story as part of you and part of this life and this community, rather than as a separate thing that you do. And I think that's a work in progress. Probably when I start running workshops again, that's something that I really like to explore. And I know sort of in that deep story, deep ecology and consciousness kind of space, there's lots of potential with that. But I'm only just finding the words for that now that I understand what's going on.
So you have been absolutely fabulous today, Anna, and I really wanted to thank you for your time and wisdom. How can people find you if they want to find out more about you and your work?
I'm on LinkedIn just sort of as a little blurb. It's a storyteller and photographer and outdoor guide and all those other hats that I wear. So that's a good little read to start with, and then just email me if you want to chat.
Well, thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you. Great chat, Ali.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.